this is a spoiler.
You can't listen to this and not have spoilers.
Who recommended The Fall?
Wasn't it Laura?
I think it was me. I was hoping you wouldn't. I was hoping you'd like go right over that and like, oh, okay, I'll summarize the.
Well, I'm remembering what you said last week about those who recommended. I know. And you don't have to. I'll tell you what, Laura. I loved this book.
Oh, good.
I did too. It really hit me.
Good.
It was like a one night read, and it was something else.
Oh,
yeah,
wonderful.
me too.
Okay.
So Laura, stand up, put your hand on your heart, give us a summary.
All right. Okay. Okay. So, stop me. Well, first of all, I thought one of the ways to get started on the summary would be to actually quote from the book itself, because he says something very interesting toward the end of the book about what he was doing, is doing. Anyway, he says here, this is, I mean, I don't know, I'm on Kindle, so I'm page 136. Anyway, he says, so I've been practicing my useful profession at Mexico City for some time. It consists, to begin with, as you know from experience, in indulging in public confession as often as possible. I accuse myself up and down. It's not hard, for I now have acquired a memory. But let me point out that I don't accuse myself crudely, beating my breast. No, I navigate skillfully, multiplying distinctions and digressions too. In short, I adapt my words to my listener and lead him to go one better. I mingle what concerns me and what concerns others. I choose the features we have in common, the experiences we have endured together, the failings we share. Good form, in other words, the man of the hour as he is rife in me and in others. With all that I construct a portrait which is the image of all and of no one. A mask, in short, rather like those carnival masks which are both lifelike and stylized, so that they make people say, "Why, surely I've met him." When the portrait is finished, as it is this evening, I show it with great sorrow. This, alas, is what I am. The prosecutor's charge is finished, but at the same time the portrait I hold out to my contemporaries becomes a mirror. Anyway, that's sort of my introduction to the summary.
Good line.
Yeah, I love that last one about the mirror. Anyway, so this is, as we all know, a story or I don't know, an adventure, a travel of the primary character, who is what's his name? Clemente? Clement?
Yeah, I think it's John Baptiste
Clement, right? Right, Clemente. And it is his. He meets this gentleman at this bar, which is Mexico City, as I recall, and he essentially confesses to this gentleman over a period of 5 days, and he confesses his sins. He confesses as well as his achievements. He worked for a long time in Paris as a prosecutor. I find it fascinating that this is a lawyer that who's doing the confessing, and it turns out it's a lawyer he's confessing to, and it was fascinating, me being a lawyer myself, to look at what they're saying about the law versus God and faith. But anyway, so he confesses over the course of these 5 days all of his sins, including, sleeping with every woman known to man, and his being in love, being out of love, what love means to him, love meant to him, which, by the way, I believe was Camus' position in real life about love and women. And he confesses, and also he was a very exceptional prosecutor in Paris. He primarily defended orphans and women. I mean, I guess the poor who couldn't provide for themselves. And he took great, a great. I loved the way he loved himself, in a sense, the way he was so wonderful and good and providing for the poor and giving a seed over to someone who needed a seed and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then one day he was walking along the Seine, and this woman jumps into the Seine, and he hears the body splash in there, and he does nothing. He hears it, and he does nothing, and he continues to walk away. And this is something that is with him all the way through this, and is referred to in the last, at the end, and where he says, then please tell me what happened to you one night on the quays of the Seine and how you managed to never risk your life. You yourself utter the words that for years have never ceased echoing through my nights, and that I shall at last say through your mouth, "Oh, young woman, throw yourself into the water again so that I may a second time have the chance of saving both of us." And I think that ultimately, so in terms of plot, in terms of basic plot, that's what it was. It's a confession over a 5-day period to this gentleman, but it obviously is primarily a very Christian Catholic document, and as I understand it, Camus, it's also a sort of a statement against, or maybe an attack against, Sartre and these aesthetic existentialists who have obviously, as Nietzsche says, right, killed God. There is no God. And I think that Camus struggled with that because, and I think that's part of what this book is, given also that it's his last book too as well, that he struggled with that, walking away from God, walking away from faith, even though, like, he doesn't believe, but he does believe, because he did as a child. So I think that that's another thing that is a big part of this book. As we know, it's the fall that refers to the fall of Adam and Eve, of man. So in many ways, it's a very religious document book, and in many ways, it's not. Take it from there, people.
Nice summary, thank you.
Anyway.
Yeah, really. There's a couple of the fall of man, of course. I think that the woman jumping off the bridge, it just occurred to me that might also be a part of the title, the fall. And there's one titular part of the book where he talks about having these nights where he's tirelessly dancing and enjoying himself, and he comes to a flash of understanding about humanity and life and like the existential situation surrounding all of us. And then there's the morning that comes around, and he says that's the fall. There's one line where he says the fall, and I'm trying to find it here, and it has to do with that morning time, that
day. You mean the day after the debauchery?
Yeah.
And he's referring to that morning as the fall.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Rather than the debauchery itself being the fall.
Yes.
I thought of St. Paul too, right? Because there's this kind of line of demarcation of his life before the incident with the woman and after, and his identity is kind of reformed after he has that moment of kind of, that's the beginning of a recognition, where he goes back and he questions all of his, saintly behavior and finds it self-motivated after all. So I don't know. There was a resonance there with St. Paul for me too. Maybe having to do with his fall.
Is this page 143? Such nights or such mornings rather, parentheses, for the fall occurs at dawn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to? I go out and walk briskly along the canals.
That's right.
So that page, that statement, did what for you, Nathan?
I just I wanted to tie in that it was titular, just to kind of get everything out on the outset. I think that that's a pretty good canvas, and now we can dive in specifically.
Yeah, I mean, well, that obviously brings up that whole discussion of him living that debauchery, which he did to a great extent.
Yeah. That early life that he talks about, he really talks about his life in two phases. I think part of the beauty of this is over that 5-day course, you get this. It's really this. It's such a tight story. It's really.
It is
telling. I mean, he leaves these little breadcrumbs that are so. One of the first things he's talking about in the first phase, I guess, or maybe the first act, the first day, he's talking about the life that he led as a lawyer and as a general man. He
Right.
says that he had his life that he was living was simply. He was talking about just the ease with which life was coming to him and how it seemed that he had a pride in it because it was earned. And then he has this little moment, but then there was that evening, and then he leaves off of it and just kind of leaves that idea of an evening that's bothering him lingering. And he doesn't pick that up until later. But and then that evening was the woman jumping off the bridge. And everything turns around for him. And it's not just that moment either. There's also the stoplight scene where he is comically done an injustice, and he realizes that if that injustice can happen to him, or if he can be made such a fool of so easily without anyone else getting their just desserts, then he's not really the Superman that he thought that he was. Here's this. He's talking about just how things were going well in his life. It's worth reading this one. Here it is. Yes.
What page is it?
28.
Okay.
And this is him setting up his lifestyle before things turned for him. And he said, "Few creatures were more natural than I. I was altogether in harmony with life, fitting into it from top to bottom without rejecting any of its ironies, its grandeur, or its servitude. In particular, the flesh, matter, the physical in short, which disconcerts or discourages so many men in love or in solitude, without enslaving me, brought me steady joys. I was made to have a body. Whence that harmony in me, that relaxed mastery that people felt, even to telling me sometimes that it helped them in life. Hence my company was in demand. Often, for instance, people thought they had met me before. Life, its creatures, and its gifts offered themselves to me, and I accepted such marks of homage with a kindly pride. To tell the truth, just from being so fully and simply a man, I looked upon myself as something of a Superman."
Yeah.
And and he's careful in all of this not to be bragging, and not to, even if it sounds like a brag, he's trying to say, this is just a fact. I was charming. If you can just take that as read,
no, he said
then
that,
I can tell you
I
something
looked great.
else.
I was attractive. Women wanted me. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, I don't know. I got a little sense of a brag, but okay, I'll go with it.
But I think
sometimes it really is just a matter of fact.
Okay,
Truly. If George Clooney wrote this, would you know what I mean? Like, it's just, sometimes it's just real.
It's just the way it is. Okay.
Yeah. I also like in the beginning where he taught, basically where we're all implicated, and what he's actually trying to he's seeking in his early life, he's seeking goodness, and he finds that it's that more than goodness, he's getting self-satisfaction, and but there's something. There's something more to it. He wants to have. I think he truly wants to be good. He's looking for that path in life, and instead, what he finds is that people frequently do good things for selfish reasons. And I have a line that I really like that I want to read. I think it's on page 41. If pimps and thieves were invariably sentenced, all decent people would get to thinking they themselves were constantly innocent, cher monsieur. And in my opinion, that's what must be avoided above all. Otherwise, everything would be just a joke. So that, we need our trespasses, right? we can't count everyone's trespasses. And we also can't not count our own. We can't say, just because you're guilty, I'm innocent. Or I would never do that. Or that's not in my character. It's in all of us.
Well, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I mean, that ties in to what you set up in the beginning with the phase transition that goes on through the story. So he really sets you up in this, setting him. He puts himself forward, but it's really this confession that's a mirror. And whenever he flips it, he says, actually, whenever I was being a great lawyer and thinking I was helping orphans and doing all of this really fine stuff, what I was actually doing was nursing myself. And whenever I realized that I wasn't above everything, just like with the traffic accident, then everything changed for me, and I could start to see, the cracks in my life, and they, begin to spread. And so by the end of this, he's telling you all the things that have gone wrong or that are complex about being a human from his perspective. But by doing that, he's opened up to you a natural human condition that you can't help but see in yourself. And at one point he says, I know that this story doesn't flatter me. I think he was talking about a woman that he seduced because she snubbed him at one point, and he just wanted to get her affections. And he said, I know that this doesn't flatter me, but if you look at your own story, you may have one to tell me in just a moment. And
motive and motive in all of this stuff, motive in generosity, motive in love. What's your true motive?
And I think it's please, sorry.
I was just going to say it's a problem with altruism, right? And I think it ties into his unbelief in a god. So all his good acts were only to the more give glory to himself rather than, I guess, God in the sense of what religious people would say that they were doing these good things for. He has a line on 25, living aloft is still the only way of being seen and hailed by the largest number.
I love that.
So,
I wrote that one down too.
Yeah.
There was something that he said on page 6 that, started off.
Oh, I love that one. I know where you're going.
I sometimes think of what future historians will say of us. A single sentence will suffice for modern man. He fornicated and read the paper. And I thought about that. It's like, yep, we gossip.
Yeah.
That's like.
But it's interesting to think what Camus, why he wrote that. I mean, what was in his mind at that moment writing that. I mean, it's fascinating.
Well, and I think that's that simple line right there with the fornication in the papers is brought up later in maybe the 4th day or the 3rd day. He talks about the dynamic that drove him in his life. So, there was a line where he said, I'm ashamed to say, but if I had been given 10 conversations with Einstein, I would have thrown them away for a pretty
a woman, girl. I know.
But, however, he goes on to say, but if I had spent 10 days with that girl, I would be dying for a conversation with Einstein.
Know him.
We are changeable.
Funny.
So, I mean, I think that I just want to put this in, like, stake in the ground. I think that the real, like, the joke or the punchline or the twist of the story is how he so carefully sets you up to. It's almost like a villain or something. Like, this is like a grand plan that he has to lure in with his confessions and get everyone to see that this is his role that he's defined at the beginning, the judge penitent. He's not just judging. He's not just getting up and saying, you people, you people. He's like a comedian in this way. He gets up and he says, this is me, and if you happen to see yourself in this, well, that's all the better.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says he goes to the bar to have people confess to him after, he mentions at one point after they're drunk, they, fall on the ground crying.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of that I really liked because he's not really accusing himself, but accusing all of mankind. And this I think really plays into that. The truth is that every intelligent man, as you know, dreams of being a gangster and of ruling over society by force alone. So he doesn't even bring himself into it. But if you consider yourself intelligent, you have to actually take that in and say, would I want to do that?
Well, and then the anecdote he gives about the stoplight, I mean, I think everybody could see themselves in that. And the thing that he wanted above all was not, it wasn't just like to, I mean, so he pulls up to the stoplight, there's a guy on a motorcycle, and the motorcycle's stalling, and the light turns green, and he's saying, get out of the way, and the guy's like, fuck you, and everyone behind him starts blaring their horns, and so he gets out of his car and is like, hey, excuse me, can, you get out of the way, and another motorist comes up and is going to stop him from interacting, and whenever he turns to address that guy, the motorcycle guy punches him in the head and then drives off, and then he turns and the motorcycle guy's gone, and all the cars are honking their horn at him, and like now he's the asshole, and he has to get back in his car, and he's thinking that the only thing I want to do is catch up with this guy on the motorcycle and put him against the curb and, just make it right in some way. He wanted to come to be vindicated. He wanted to be completely dominant, and dominant comes up quite a few times in this, and I wonder about that word. He talks about it again with islands. He says that he enjoys the small islands because they're easy to dominate.
Yeah.
And I think in that way he's meaning also dominion and perspective, and there's something that I'm trying to tie in here that he talks about earlier. He says that if he was being honest, he wants the world to be waiting for him on the back burner, that whenever he wants to call a friend, he wants them to be there. He wants everybody to stop what they're doing for him. In short, he wants the world to exist for him.
There's actually a line, I think it might tie into this on page 68. He says, I could live happily only on the condition that all individuals on Earth, or the greatest possible number, were turned towards me, eternally in suspense, devoid of independent life and ready to answer my call at any moment, doomed in short to sterility until the day I should deign to favor them. In short, for me to live happily, it was essential for the creatures I chose not to live at all. They must receive their life sporadically, only at my bidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the line.
At what page does the woman fall into the sin? Do you remember?
I don't have that written down.
Because you're saying, right, Nathan, that that it was what we see is a change at that point. And before the fall and after the fall.
Yeah.
No pun intended. I think.
You can see. It's probably despite the fact that he got so much enjoyment out of being generous, he could still feel like he was that he was being good, or that he was on the road to goodness. But in that act, in ignoring that, he couldn't lie about it anymore. He had to, because there wasn't,
Go ahead.
In ignoring her, that was a definite act.
Yeah, because it's not just that he saw someone jump off of a bridge. The way it's set up, and I'm just thinking back to it, he sees this woman late at night staring over the edge of the bridge, and he walks past her. And it's not until he's passed that he hears just a horrible sound of the body hitting the water. And then he hears screams going downstream. And he does not jump in the water, and he does not go and save her. And this haunts him to where later he's having a great night, and he's about to, next to the river, this is later, smoke a cigarette of satisfaction when he hears a laugh from the river. And it sends like a chill through him.
Right.
And the laugh, disappears down the stream, and he's haunted by that real loneliness. And so if you go back to before he even mentioned this in the first section, that first day he's talking, he says something that I thought was just really staggering about friendships. And he's saying, you want your friends to be there for you, and you hope that they'll call on the night whenever you're considering your suicide. But they never do. They call on the day whenever you're happy and busy, for. They just miss it. And to me, he's, as much as showing a mirror to other people at the end of the story, he sees in that woman a mirror of himself and is terrified by that desolation that she encountered, and sees what it would be like to feel that way and to die and to shout out and for no one to come for him either.
In other words, she was calling and he didn't answer.
I mean, the Seine is not a little stream that you jump into to save somebody from either. I mean, it's a really not, they're both going to die. I mean, he talks about how quickly the water was running that night and stuff like that. That's the other thing, is that I won't, I mean, it wasn't just I won't save you, it was I won't die for you. All of my generosity. I'm not Christ. I am not going to die for your sins or for your sorrow or anything else. I'm not going to try and save you because it'll kill me.
Yeah, and we should talk about Christ in a second. But
yeah, we should.
The last line of the book deals just with this woman and the idea of going back. And Laura quoted the majority up to it, but then there's, this. Oh, young woman, throw yourself in the water again so that I may have a second time the chance to save both of us. And then the very end is, just suppose, though, that we should be taken literally. We'd have to go through with it. And the water is so cold, but let's not worry, it's too late now. It will always be too late, fortunately.
Yeah, the last line, I thought of that.
Fortunately.
I remember I looked at that word and I thought, what is he saying? Why fortunately? Why not unfortunately?
But is he telling himself that he'll get it next time?
Well, that there won't be a next time, so he's happy. And this goes back to what he was saying about friends and death. It's like, oh, we love our friends, but the friends we love more are the ones that are dead.
Because they don't impose on you.
And he was like, I had an ex, and that ex died, and immediately in my heart there was a place for her, in a way that there wouldn't have been even if she was still alive when we were talking. And there's a way in which the finality of death instantly cements something, or aggrandizes, romanticizes, yet it's cut off. And so at the end here, I can imagine going back, but imagine if we could, that would be really tough, but we can't absolutely. So that's a fortunate thing there. But that fortunate is, that's a lingering line there. It's terrifying, and it's.
So he's saying that he can keep the thought in mind that now that he's thought about it, if he were to go back, even though that's impossible, he'd handle the situation correctly. So
I think that he would, but he can't. So
exactly.
It's easy to romanticize yourself and think that you can. So maybe I'm left with that, I think, is what he's saying.
But
situation.
Go ahead.
The situation just reminds me of. I think I recently read No Country for Old Men, and the sheriff there. He's spends his entire life doing good deeds, but he regrets the fact that he let his comrades die back in the war.
Right.
But nothing he does, no matter how noble and good a life he lives, he can't go back to that moment and die with his friends or fix that scenario. So in the same sense that this guy, living his entire life thinking about this one moment where he was supposed to put his money where his mouth is and he was found wanting.
Well, I mean, imagine if someone's about to die right in front of you and you do nothing. I mean, you hear, it's going to happen, and you do nothing. I mean, you actively do nothing.
Yeah, isn't that the Phil Collins song? Isn't that the myth behind one of those really popular songs that a singer saw a woman drowning and didn't do anything, but then saw her later? I don't know. This is off text. There's a really popular song, and I've heard, and this might be a myth, but it serves the point well, that a guy, and this is actually a good twist of the story, a guy sees or hears a woman drowning, sees her, I guess, and doesn't do anything, and then later sees her. Not as a ghost, but she made it out, and he's, kind of left with, oh man, I really didn't do the right thing.
Yeah, but she made it out.
Mm-hmm.
That's another weird thought.
Well, even in the book, doesn't he say he avoided reading the newspapers as to not get the report? Right?
Yeah. As for that, I didn't read the newspapers for days.
Yeah.
One day I used to work in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, I was just gonna. While we were on the subject of that last line, it seemed to me that implicated the confession itself too, because I think one thing I got the sense of in my reading, and I did kind of, I'm still lacking the last 30% of the novel, I think. But I read enough around to get to the ending, and I was reading about it, and I really felt a sense of suspicion for the narrator too in the act of the confession. And it seemed part of his point to me was that you really don't get around that self-motivated aspect of human life under any circumstances. I'm sorry. And the confession itself, when he gives you that last line, that it's fortunate that you don't have that second chance. That kind of indicates to me, I think, that the confession itself is a sort of offering, a low stakes offering, I guess. You don't have to, it's sort of that apology when there's really no restitution possible, and it's suspect for that reason. And he never really. The way I heard one professor put it, she said he never has to choose between the lesser of two evils, and in that way he's finding it easier to be a saint than a man. And he always, that saintly existence he lived before the woman jumped in, and the motorcycle incident as well, they both kind of showed him, the mask slipped in those moments, and his instinctual reaction was not in alignment with the self-image he had. And so he finds that he has a sort of crisis there, I guess, the cliched existential crisis, right, where he has to then come to terms with this mask I've been wearing, is not actually me, and from then on it's no longer comfortable to wear it, and so now the confession is sort of his way of, performing his own kind of consolation prize. He's trying to give himself, he's kind of endlessly performing that act of absolution, but without ever being able to receive it. I think one of you guys talked about that at the beginning. There's no one to confess to. There's no one that can forgive you. So you have to, you're just stuck in that place that Sartre and the other existentialists left you without any possible, forgiveness.
Yeah, I really thought that the doves in the sky that no one can see, that that played into the God is dead thing. But wouldn't it be nice if there actually were, if there actually were a God, if there actually were some way, some form of absolution?
Yeah, because one of the key questions, I think, was that does the guilt of everyone, does this universal complicity in any way absolve us of our own guilt? Does the fact that maybe we couldn't do otherwise, or the fact that everybody else is also, in this human condition that they can't get out of, and, you can always point the finger. You can always say that, this is simply this state of nature in which we're a part of, and we're, that's kind of the flip side of what we were talking about earlier, where he's, enjoining everyone, who he confesses to in this bar, and, seeing the mirror. But is that, does that in any way kind of, I don't know, like I was thinking about this in a personal way, because what you see, I think something that I engage with a lot of the time and find myself involved in as well is kind of humility, in which you have a certain amount of self-deprecation or a certain amount of self-criticism, and that kind of signs your hall pass in order to talk about other people and gossip, kind of like you were saying, Mary, or to be the judge. The penitence, writes your hall pass to be the judge.
Meaning I suck, so I can tell everybody else they suck.
Right. If you can make your own confession, with as much gory detail and with, as damning as you can make it, does that allow you then to be the judge? Does that give you permission?
Well, if you start at the bottom, you're not worried about getting mud thrown back at you, right? If you start your speech off, well, I'm this terrible, terrible person. I've done all this stuff. You lay it out in the open, so you can no longer call you on that, right?
Exactly.
Although I've always thought that admitting that you're an asshole does not make it okay to be an asshole. You don't get a hall pass just for saying that that's the way you are. But on the other hand, and I strongly believe that, people do not, most of the people that I know do not give themselves the kind of break that they deserve for being human, for being an animal, for having a body. You can really twist yourself in knots and, spend a lot of time eating your liver over things that just
aren't worth it.
Yeah, relax.
Chill.
Yeah.
I'd agree. It's a lot harder to let you off the hook, and I think that plays into this, no absolution, no forgiveness, and everything is permanent in this existentialist worldview. And I mean, I have glimpses of that. I still have pangs. I still get pangs of awkward feelings when I think back to my first grade 7 dance and how terrible that was. I can't say like I'm an adult now. I can let it go. Heather doesn't remember me.
Oh no, it stays with you forever. There's no going back.
There's no going back.
Well, I've always thought that that's what therapy is just whatever you work out, it's getting the courage to lift up the rocks to see the bugs underneath it, and then at some point realizing that those bugs aren't so bad. They're just bugs, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah. Here's what he says. This is 141. Admit that today you feel less pleased with yourself than you felt 5 days ago.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good one, huh? It's like you'll come back, I'm sure, and you'll find me unchanged. And why should I change, since I have found the happiness that suits me? I have accepted duplicity instead of being upset about it. On the contrary, I have settled into it and found there the comfort I was looking for throughout life. I was wrong, after all, to tell you that the essential was to avoid judgment. The essential is being able to permit oneself everything, even if, from time to time, one has to profess vociferously one's own infamy. I permit myself everything again. Yeah.
I think it makes sense in life to try it at least once or twice, right? Let
Yeah.
yourself go, I with a lot of this stuff I think about, one of the things that I find annoying is party guilt. It's like you go to a party and sure, if every single time you go to a party you get drunk and you make, you stand on the table and make pronouncements about whatever, then yeah, maybe you should think about not drinking so much. But, just the general, I had a really good time last night, maybe I got a little loud, feeling bad about it afterwards, I find very annoying, with friends or something. It's just oh, for Christ's sakes, you just let loose. Let it go.
Chill.
We all had fun.
Enjoy your
didn't kill
Dionysian
anyone.
revelry.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Enjoy your Dionysian revelry,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're permitted.
But it
it's
says
okay.
But he said, remember this quote in what he says, such nights or such mornings rather, for the fall occurs at dawn.
Yeah.
I go out and walk briskly along the canals. I mean, the fall occurs. It happens. And that's because we live in this Christian society, which we haven't discussed yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, go into
isn't
that.
It also there's degrees of variation between, the sins that you might commit, right? I mean, there's dancing on the table a little too, ecstatically, and then there's, turning your back on the woman. Some things you're going to be able to shrug off. Some guilts are going to stay with you.
Yeah, but I still want to bring up that I actually think that maybe you run and find a cop or something like that, but that was an impossible situation. So I think that there's something in there about saving people who can't possibly be saved also. The fall is, he's taking on a lot of guilt about something that he probably couldn't have done a lot about.
Well, maybe that's the guilt of humankind.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
that's
so
what he's
here we go with
saying.
Jesus, right.
Well, however, I think that he may have been able to, if not save her, at least died in the most meaningful way. I think that that's something he struggles with, is that he could have tried. He could have lost his individuality, which means his life, and given it up for this other person. And he did not. He could have jumped in. It's not like he could not have. That would be something different. He could wipe his hands away. The fact that he was hesitated, because the challenge is big, he's not excused.
Well, isn't that... Go ahead.
I mean, I think that he might have gone over and talked to her when he saw her. That was something that he might have done. I used to work in Marin, and there was, one of the days when I was coming home, I went over the Golden Gate Bridge every day, and there was a jumper, and
God,
man,
famous bridge.
The people in their cars were way more upset that they were late, because traffic was stopped. They were way more upset that they were in traffic than that someone was going to die in a second. It's just, there's an incredible callousness. If it inconveniences you.
Well, then maybe that's what he was saying, Camus.
Yeah.
By setting up that situation the way he did. In other words, he also, at the beginning of the book, when he's talking about all the incredible things he was doing and, defending the poor and, giving up his seat and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I mean, isn't there a quality of how he was giving of himself at the beginning of the book and then how he didn't give of himself or could have given of himself at the time that woman jumped in the river?
Yeah.
There's a quality in the difference. But maybe if we look at the whole picture, what he's saying is that we can't save. We can't give ourselves. We are human. We can't do this. Hence, that's why we need God.
Well, and this gets to Jesus and his idea of Jesus in the story and the censor of Luke. He talks about Jesus and the slaughter of the innocents and Jesus having to live with that and the crushing weight of that guilt of being the survivor of it. And I just want to open the door. You may hear me hesitating here. It's because there's so much that I want to talk about, and I'm just trying to get it all in a line.
Just go for it, Nathan. Go for it.
Well, there's this brilliant section where he's talking about Jesus and the life that he led, and what I like about it is he's talking about the different gospels a little bit. He doesn't say gospels.
What page is that again?
I couldn't tell you. I want to say it's in the later third or the early fourth.
Yeah. Oh wait, yeah. I think you're right.
And he's talking about Jesus being up on the cross and dealing with guilt and letting himself be killed because he felt guilty that all these other people had died for him and that this was a repentance. And then on the cross saying that thou hast forsaken me, talking to God, like what did I do? What did you do? What is this? What's going on? And the fact that Luke censored it, screamed it aloud because someone else didn't. And whenever it got out, there's this line, he says that, God, I'd love to be able to find it. He talks about the censor and whenever it's right here. No, that's not it. Anyway, the gist was that by censoring it, he highlighted the most important thing. And it's that struggle that Jesus had on the cross there. And this is the struggle that I think Jean deals with in the story of being a survivor with the guilt. And his way of getting back at the world is to express it or to show other people that like he thought of himself that he was above, that he's actually not, that he's a part of the work and the problems and the crime, and that if you really look inside yourself, you're going to find this guilt. And and he also says though about this method of showing people a mirror through himself that it's not the ideal. This is just what he's hit upon. It's not the perfect solution, but this is what he's come up with.
It's how he copes.
I'm on page 116 because I'm looking kind of what you're talking about.
I found the line.
Okay, where is it?
It's 113.
Oh, good. I'm in the area.
Yeah.
Right area.
Yes, it was the third evangelist, I believe, who first suppressed his complaint. Why hast thou forsaken me?
Right.
It was a seditious cry, wasn't it? Well, then the scissors. Mind you, if Luke had suppressed nothing, the matter would hardly have been noticed. In any case, it would not have assumed such importance. Thus the censor shouts aloud what he prescribes. The world's order likewise is ambiguous. And that line right there, I'm stuck here. There's a couple of lines in the book that are really rich, and that I'm still trying to get something out of. But I think
what the world's order likewise is ambiguous. That line.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think what he says there is that what's left in, what we, or what is rather not said. I'm not sure here. I'm hoping someone else can pick up a thread.
Well, what we want to censor, what gets censored, what gets censored in your head, in your own life. What do you censor of your experiences with other people? Those are the things that should be screaming at you.
And I think it also presumes that the order, the world's order that we see, the stories that we have, are ambiguous because of that. That there's something left out, there's something edited. And namely, I think it's the lives of the people. What we have are the stories and the ideas of what's gone on. Though there is...
Actually, I have a completely different take on this.
Please.
Spill it, Laura.
I don't know if it's going to be anything worthwhile, but when I see that line, I'm kind of separating it from the paragraph in a way. The world's order likewise is ambiguous. To me, that's a comment on Christianity and its role in our society. When he says the world's order likewise is ambiguous, what he's saying is that Christianity is a fallacy, because that's what Christianity tries to do, is make the world's order not ambiguous. Anyway, I guess that wasn't it.
Oh, well, and so the gospel then would be the gospel that's writ, or that the one that passes through, is the Christian order as we know it around us, and the world's order to some degree.
But I guess the story, Luke's story is that Jesus was sacrificed on the cross for humanity.
Right.
And what he censored was that line, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" So that changes the story from like a willing participant to, the good human model of, you jump in the bridge and you're happy about it, to, no, actually Jesus was not happy with what's going on.
And so you should have helped me.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to die.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah. So it's actually, too bad he didn't see that in light of his own depression about not, sacrificing himself for that woman.
I guess the fallacy, the censored material is that nobody wants to die, but we're going through life thinking ourselves as good people, willing at a moment's drop to sacrifice ourselves.
Oh wow! Then the world's order is likewise ambiguous. Would be something like that things are okay, or that the...
Where do you get that things are okay? Jesus Christ!
Well, that there's at least a sense that the world order, that the reasoning and all of the understanding that we have of the world is ambiguous because it's belied, or that it's it's an inheritance that we get, but we miss the lives of the inheritor. That we may have all of these fixtures around us. God, it's a good line. It's a good line.
We're waiting for you, Nathan. We're going through this with you. We're suffering with you.
Yeah.
We're all on the cross, looking down the line at you. Well, I have a line from a little bit, I don't know if it's earlier or later, that I would like to throw out there. And this is basically about truth and lies. Sometimes it is easier to see clearly into the liar than into the man who tells the truth. Truth, like light, blinds. Falsehood, on the contrary, is a beautiful twilight that enhances every object. And
where is this?
Let's see. Truth. I think it's on page 119, but that's the page that my Kindle told me.
All right.
But I do like the idea that the idea that falsehood is a beautiful twilight that enhances every object. I like it because part of me thinks that sure, lying's bad, but it takes imagination, a very human quality.
Yeah.
And that you can make things, depending on the lie, that you can make things better. I think about him helping the blind man and then tipping his hat as he walked away. Certainly not tipping his hat for the blind guy. He's doing it for himself. And just
to himself.
Yeah.
And the world also is a performative act.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But here's my act of altruism, and here's Jesus on the cross, and here's Luke lying for him, So, knowing that Luke lied and looking into the falsehood, what does that tell you about how Luke felt? Luke wanted to make Jesus the stoic hero, but that.
Yeah, so that's it. That's the ambiguous then. I got it. It's that at least it points to something that's been left out, and I guess that's not a huge revelation, but we know that the world around us is, it's missing something, or it's just a piece, but it throws all the order that we have into an ambiguity because there is something that's missing, and it may be that the order that we get, these stories are just a way of continuing, but they're missing it. Maybe that the world's order themselves is a lie, that we're missing out on a truth that gets edited out by life and death, people dying and not being able to express their inner worlds, but that people will come across again and again precisely by living a life in that world that they've inherited.
Yeah, I think about like the early people and, maybe it's mystery still, I guess, to me at least, how language got started. But you have, I imagine early human beings looking around at a world that they have to interpret for themselves, and kind of like Mary was talking about, you form these interpretations of what you see around you, and, we make meaning, we make concepts, we make understandings, and we share them socially. And a big theme in the novel is forgetting and remembering, and I think when those fantasies start to work causally for us, and when they start to be productive and easy, we forget that they are fantasies and constructions, and we forget that we're layering meaning on top of the world. And so then, we're surprised when the mask slips. We're surprised when those meanings don't end up, adhering just so perfectly to our experience, and they have to be readapted or readjusted. And I think, that's part of his difficulty with forgetting and remembering. It's that misalignment, perhaps, of interpretation to what's being interpreted.
Yeah, he says something about stories in this way, and I'm going to connect metaphorically stories to a world order, because I consider the Christian narrative and all of our science and everything to be the order that we see around us. And on 100, he's talking about love and his mistresses. He says, "At least until she became my mistress, I realized that the true love stories, though they taught how to talk of love, did not teach how to make love." And there's something
that was really beautiful
that it's missing, right? That you may get this ordered story in front of you, though you're going to have to put in some kind of extra thing, this work. And I think that's where the ambiguity comes in. And it's also what can lead you to living a lie if you're trying to match up to the true story, true capital T. And what is and you can feel false against that, and that's the rub.
It's kind of the biggest lie, right? The fairy tale of love that we tell ourselves, our children, that what people believe love is supposed to be about, romantic love anyway. That fairy tale, half the people more than half the people who get married get divorced. It's not easy to be married, Love does not conquer all. The fucking bills come in.
Wait, since when is marriage and love are the same thing?
Well,
okay.
I'm talking about the fairy tale.
Okay.
I'm not talking about reality.
Reality. Okay.
Yeah.
I agree with you, though. I mean, like, we're surrounded by those narratives, and it's wish fulfillment, and the best possible scenario, the unachievable fantasy is what our expectation is. That's what we're kind of enculturated to expect from society and from our own relationships from a very early age, and really to the point where we don't even have kind of an alternative in mind. That's just like, it's that or nothing.
Well,
and you're a personal failure if you don't achieve it.
I think that's a very important point, that we don't have an alternative in mind, because I think that that's something else that comes out of this book, which is that I think Camus had a real problem with what Sartre and these existentialists were, promoting and writing about and enforcing on, and that is that that there is no God. And I think that even though Camus was on board with that, there was something in him that had a real problem with that.
Because there's no alternative, because they didn't offer an alternative.
They didn't offer an alternative.
Despair. Yeah.
I know, that's the problem. And I think that's what a lot of society suffers from. I mean, I'm not pro-Christian or anything. I'm just saying that that's fascinating, that exists. Like he says here, those of, where is it? The others are involved. Do you know what has become of one of the houses in the city that sheltered Descartes? It's a lunatic asylum. I mean, that's another. I mean, it's just interesting, that he, knowing who Camus was, who his friends were, who he was, what he was doing at the time. It's just fascinating to see how he's separating himself in a way from them.
Yeah.
Philosophically.
He caught a lot of flack for this novel, right? This novel was written and kind of came out at a time when his public reputation was under siege heavily. He was not popular with the dominant kind of philosophical literary society, who are mostly Marxist, and he was being sort of championed by a conservative base who he was really opposed to. And he was just largely misinterpreted, from what I understand, across the board, and the object of vicious personal attacks and misinterpretations.
Yeah,
and then he won the Nobel.
Yeah, boom.
Yeah. So.
There was something else that jumped out at me, and I keep thinking about poor Nathan and the ambiguity of it all.
Us.
Oh, I think I'm onto something. Yeah, I think I got it. I think it's settled once and for all.
Okay.
I'm reading this here. I guess I'm on 117. It says, "But the keenest of human torments is to be judged without a law. Yet we are in that torment, deprived of their natural curb. The judges, loosed at random, are racing through their job. Hence, we have to try to go faster than they, don't we? And it's a real madhouse. Prophets and quacks multiply. They hasten to get there with a good law or a flawless organization." That's what law is, organization, before the world is deserted. Fortunately, I arrived. I am the end and the beginning. I announce the law. In short, I am a judge penitent. I think that's an interesting paragraph.
Oh yeah.
About this organization. I mean, that's what law is. We need these laws. That's what Christianity is. It's laws. It has nothing to do with spirituality. It's all about, having this is what the law is, and this is what, the prophets say, and this is what we have to go to church, and we have to, give thanks for this, and this is when we say the prayer. I mean, the laws of the Mass and all of that. It's all laws.
It's a force for social order.
Right. It supports these social orders. It stabilizes. It's like marriage. It stabilizes social order. Has nothing to do with love. Has nothing to do with spirituality. Has nothing to do with freedom.
Yeah.
So, line on page 11, he's talking about the Jews being killed in the Second World War, and he says, "When one has no character, one has to apply a method."
Yeah, I know. I highlighted that.
Yeah.
Good line.
Well, do you think that
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
when you get, I'm thinking about it having nothing to do with any of those things, and I'm wondering, doesn't it have to cash out, at least in your imagination on a personal level at some point, in order for you to apply that discipline, in order to exact that social force on a larger scale? I mean, doesn't that have to sort of trickle down to some kind of referent, even if it's a personal one? Or is it just, I don't know.
No, wait, say that again. You're asking a question?
So, well, I'm wondering about, if it has to have nothing to do with freedom or love, I mean, don't those things have to have at least personal reference within the minds of Christianity's adherents, or the individuals that make up the social fabric? Don't those laws have to refer to some idea within the minds of believers in order to garner that correct action from them?
That obeying, that they're obeying. Well,
yeah, it's not completely arbitrary, right? I mean, there is some, yoke that all this seems to take up. I mean, it plays on, natural fears or inclinations, or is founded on at least biological sexual coupling and the idea of marriage. There's something there that is that's able to be played.
Yes, you can make sense of it, but it's not completely nonsensical as far as the laws are concerned, whether you like them or not. There are, but as time goes on, and the laws mean less and less.
But I mean,
then you kill God.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't that what Camus is struggling with here in this book?
Certainly one of them things that he's struggling with in the book.
I mean, he's struggling obviously with the role of Christianity, obviously, but and law. I mean, it's fascinating to me that these are the major dynamics that are in this book: law and Christianity. And it's fascinating to me that this. I mean, talk about taking on a big subject, but that's what he's examining, that struggle.
Yeah.
And being free and slavery, right? It doesn't need to do a whole discussion of slavery.
Oh yeah. But before we go to that, I really want to just get to, with the Christianity, just the thing that really struck me. I think I don't know what page it's on. Sorry, guys. It's toward the end. By the way, will you please open that cupboard? Yes. Look at that painting. Don't you recognize it? It is the Just Judges. Doesn't that make you jump? So the first thing that struck me was in his room that has nothing, he has actually set up a tabernacle.
Right.
And inside it, put the judges. And he opens it up, he opens it up sometimes and lets all that judgment just pour over him. He's very agitated. He's ill and very agitated. But I was and the other thing is that the painting is stolen. So there's, more aspects of the law, and he's, one of the things that, he gives 5 reasons why he has it there, but one of the reasons is it might land him in prison, which would not be bad. So.
Yeah, and earlier on, this is page 90, this is the first hint that you get about that painting, and I think the painting is a great punchline. Not to a joke, but as a dramatic punchline. It's set up, and then on 90, he's talking about, I think this ties into the idea of Jesus on the cross as well. So we have, Jesus saying, "Why has God forsaken me?" And that's, a truth. And then there's also the lie of what was being censored and covering up. Anyway, this is what he's saying on page 90. Otherwise, were there but one lie hidden in a life, death made it definitive. No one ever again would know the truth on this point. since the only one to know it was precisely the dead man sleeping on his secret. That absolute murder of a truth used to make me dizzy. Today, let me interject, it would cause me instead subtle joys. The idea, for instance, that I am the only one to know what everyone is looking for, and that I have at home an object which kept the police of 3 countries on the run, is a sheer delight. But let's not get into that.
Fascinating.
And so he's, turned around and is able to, really, get an enjoyment out of that world lie or what everyone knows. He's really dealing with in this later part of his life from, going from tipping his hat and being an upstanding citizen to a more subjective world. And the truths that he knows there are now valuable to him, even if they're incredibly private, and precisely because of that. We were talking about love as well, and I had this marked out. He was talking about he says, I knew a man who gave 20 years of his life to a scatterbrained woman, sacrificing everything to her, his friendships, his work, and the very respectability of his life, and who one evening recognized that he had never loved her. He had been bored. That's all, bored like most people. Hence, he made himself out of whole cloth a life full of complications and drama. Something must happen, and that explains most human commitments. Something must happen, even loveless slavery, even war or death. And yet, while he is damning there about love, he says later on, of course, this is on 57, true love is exceptional. 2 or 3 times a century, more or less. The rest of the time there is vanity or boredom. And so on the one hand, I think this gets back to the underline Daniel was putting out there, that there is something that this is, again to use my word, like yoking, that all of these institutions, namely marriage, it can be set up, it can be vacuous, but it's not absolutely. There is something there, though it's rare, and it's this interplay that he's interested in, and I think that that's where the truth is, and he's trying to get people to, hey, if you say that you're in love, we'll check it again, or if you think that it's impossible, it's also possible. You've just got to find that balance for yourself, and there's so much contradiction. He wants people to, snap out of it because, they're going to the bars and drowning their sorrows and living in a delusion, and he has gone through that delusion himself very ultimately, and he's presenting it. It's could be some kind of ruse or some kind of mean-spirited old man joke that he's trying to pull on people, though I think there's something noble about it. And yeah, I just really got into this guy's head, or felt like he got into mine.
Yeah.
Because I find myself playing the devil's advocate so often in conversations, or willing to wear on my sleeve what's my problem, and I'm not, and I'm not really doing it for the mirror effect, though I find often that people can acknowledge it or find something in themselves to relate to. That mirror is good. Again, this is off text, but I was listening to an interview. It was like episode 500, I think, of This American Life, and one of the producers was talking about Ira Glass and his interviewing style, and said this about him, that he sometimes, when the interview stalls, has this ability to share something personal about himself and to put himself out there that opens up the interviewer, and they're able to relate to it and connect and go further than they would have. And I think that that's what Camus' character Jean is doing in these stories at the bar. I think that he's opening himself up so that other people can go further. And
that he refers to that mirror at the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I think that also it really taps into a natural sympathy that most people, certainly most people that I know, have. You hear something and want to relate it to yourself and want to make someone feel better, and they say, oh God, whatever, I got in an accident on the way to work, whatever. He's like, oh, whatever it is, just like, don't feel bad, like that, And so when you have that kind of, you can work it in that way. You can open up about yourself and encourage people to open up about themselves, because I think that we're naturally sympathetic.
Well, yes, I think that there's a large percentage of people that are. I also feel like there's sociopaths, and that's interesting to me, that there's frequencies of different kinds of people interacting, and those modulations affect large-scale group chemistry, or, that's where you get leaders from, and you get followers, and there's some kind of alpha, beta, theta, gamma thing going on with each person playing a role to a higher or lesser degree. That being said, the sociopath probably has, sympathy and a slight regard, and in that way he's related to the entire human enterprise, the same way that we can sometimes be, into our own lives to the detriment of other people, and that way are playing slightly sociopathic. And I certainly feel incredibly sympathetic, and to my detriment, I think I've always wondered if there was some kind of, I don't know, a Charlie Kaufman switch that I could throw in my life if I would, and just go the other way.
Well, it's interesting that there would be these roles or these structures of behavior that we would fall into that would be so similar and regular and recurring, but then it would feel so sincere from the first person point of view. You do have that desire to fill up that awkward silence, and perhaps that can just continue to expand and just layer upon itself into decades of a loveless marriage or relationship that you don't even realize that is vacuous and devoid of real sincere feeling. Maybe that's the case, or maybe it's simply the case that something is sincere for a while and then all of a sudden becomes foreign or alien. I think that can happen too, and it's another kind of disquieting thing about human relationships or human meaning. I don't know. I don't know what the mystery is there, or what the answer to it is. But there is something there about those regularities in social situations, and the way they match up with personal experience.
Am I crazy? But am I the only one that thinks that his approach? I'm sorry, I hate to go back on text, but am I the only one that thinks that he's got a really bad approach to women?
Well, I was just looking, I think that yes and no. I think that he has some that are very genuine. So there's the one where on 65, he's talking about the act of love. He says, the act of love is a confession. He says that he didn't lie to women much, and instead he let his instinct speak clearly without subterfuges.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a way in which he let his passion or desire, whenever he had the passion and desire, speak for itself, and there was a truth there, and it was picked up on, and it allowed for, amorous relationships. And
well, let me just this is on page 59. He says, our feminine friends have in common with Bonaparte the belief that they can succeed where everyone else has failed.
God knows I've had that delusion sometimes.
Me as well, but anyway. I
was actually sympathetic with his. I felt like that it was part of his freedom and slavery. Thought that love will enslave you more than anything else in your life will ever enslave you, and that he had tremendous fear and of love and of opening up that far. He was very generous, but he didn't let people in. So the only one who really, he got in to himself. But so yeah, I was sympathetic, but I don't,
it wasn't that I wasn't sympathetic. It's just, and it didn't jump out at me at all. Like, oh God, this guy's terrible. Has a terrible perspective on women. It wasn't that at all. It's just a small little thing in the back of my head.
It's this point that, at heart you can't be selfless. So
Yeah.
So his comment that
Right.
maybe true love's, you can't love anyone truly if that means not actually looking after your interests.
Right.
I think the comment on it plays into how we go through life following methods and doing things we ought to do, things like falling in love and getting married. And I think probably at the time, I'm assuming that most women were looking for husbands because that's just what you're supposed to do, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It only surprises me even today when I thought about this recently. One of my friends is back in the dating world after being in a long-term relationship, and he's telling me sometimes he has to like break things off, and they're still being pursued by that person when he clearly put it out there that it's over. And I always wondered to myself, how could you want to be with someone who clearly tells you that you don't like them?
Right.
And what's funny is that that's so often the basis of attraction, right?
Yeah.
Wow, you can't have.
Some people are masochists.
Wait, what does he say here? Oh, right here. He says, I loved in women my partners in a certain game which had at least the taste of innocence. You see, I can't endure being bored and appreciate only diversions in life, and society, however brilliant, soon crushes me, whereas I have never been bored with the women I liked. It hurts me to confess it, and then he goes on to the Einstein issue.
I think that's exactly the same thing from the moviegoer, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me if Walker Percy had read this.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah, it would surprise me if he hadn't, actually.
There's something he says on 63, too, where he's talking after a while about the habit he gets into with women and the natural instincts that he has and the kind of game that he plays. He says that he plays different parts, but the play is always the same. And he talks a little bit earlier before this about he played the game and he knew that women didn't like one to reveal your purpose too quickly, and that there was a sort of mysteriousness that women were courting and taking to bed, and that he was protecting and keeping a secret. And he talks about this process over and over, and he has all these liaisons and love affairs, and he gets into a routine, and then this is what he says. As a result of beginning over and over again, one gets in the habit. Soon the speech comes without thinking, and the reflex follows, and one day you find yourself taking without really desiring. Believe me, for men at least, certain men at least, not taking what one doesn't desire is the hardest thing in the world.
Not taking what one doesn't desire.
Saying no.
Yeah.
Even if you don't want it.
We're trained by habit. We're slaves of habit.
It says here, I maintain secrecy knowing that it is always better to go to bed with a mystery. Interesting.
Yeah, that,
Good
now,
idea.
yeah, please.
Oh, no, you.
Well, that was just, there's a couple of lines like that where, I don't know if it's some kind of dyslexia that I have, but negatives or double negatives in sentences really trip me up. And there was one, and I don't have an answer for this one, and I want to find it here. This is getting to what we marked out we were going to talk about before in slavery.
What page is it?
I'm looking for it here.
Oh, well, while you're looking,
please.
My last thing about his relationships, I love this line so much. You know what charm is? A way of getting the answer yes without having asked any clear question. That's just beautiful.
And he said how charming he is.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is charming.
Wonderful. Yes, he is.
Tipping his hat to blind men.
All right. Here, I had that line too, and I loved it. I've just found the bit here on 46, and I can't figure it out, and I've really tried saying it out loud or just trying to change the negatives around, but maybe you guys can help me. He's talking, in this sense, I don't believe about black-white American slavery. He's talking about some kind of universal power relationship to slavery, something like kings and classes. And just between us, slavery, preferably with a smile, is inevitable then, but we must not admit it. Isn't it better that whoever cannot do without having slaves should call them free men, for the principle to begin with, and secondly, not to drive them to despair? And what I think he's talking about is imagining that we're free while being slaves, in a modern sense, to corporations or to nation states. And that if we imagine that we're free, then we have a way of smiling about our lives while still being enslaved.
What was your problem
Or
with
to our passions. I mean, it goes all the way. I mean, it's all of life, where everything enslaves us.
It's that line. It's the question. It's this double negative, and I'll read it again.
Go ahead.
Isn't it better that whoever cannot do without having slaves should call them free men? And I'm not sure I understand it. I might be putting my own interpretation onto it, but the negatives there are tripping me up.
He's just saying you should. It's kind of like give them the fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It'd be like, the plantation owners, they're you can't have slaves anymore, but you really can't deal without having people working for you, so let's just call the people who used to be slaves free men and have the same thing go on.
Or sharecroppers.
Yeah.
Or getting glazed chicken at a Chinese restaurant.
Right.
Which is his example.
So is this ironic or is this sincere?
What are you saying?
Yeah.
I think he's sincere.
Yeah, he's saying, in that way they'll continue to smile and we shall maintain our good conscience. Otherwise, we'd be obliged to reconsider our opinion of ourselves. We'd go mad with suffering, or even become modest, for everything would be possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't want everybody to be free, right?
That
Or
might
to
impinge on
acknowledge
your
that
freedom.
you're not free.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Or to acknowledge that you're not free, and that the lack of smiling as you're serving the glazed chicken is a way of showing you the truth when you would rather have the lie.
You mean the person who's buying the chicken?
Yeah, the person buying the chicken would like to believe that they're getting a nice chicken dinner and everything's right with the world and there's not really a consequence of the power structure that got them there. However, the unsmiling server is letting you know that...
knows the reality.
Yeah, and that you're the asshole.
Yeah, exactly. So who's really the one in charge? Who's the authority here?
Yeah, and I think, again, generalized, what he's getting at is that we are preferring to consider ourselves free when that delusion allows for a larger form of slavery to take place. That, it's, freedom to do what? Or...
Right. Well, it's the categories themselves masks the more complex power relations behind them. And maybe we can combat structural forms of power where, like slavery, you can really get your head around that. But he's saying, if even the lowest man can still kick a dog, then that pervasive sort of power hierarchy is pretty impossible to combat. So perhaps better we have an illusion than, admit that everybody is, in a sense, a slave, and that slavery is, in that, from that view, impossible to eradicate.
Well, and I think that it's not preference.
Is that a good view?
No, I see. I think that you're absolutely right, and I think that this is his jester in the king's court thing again. He's saying, between you and me, this is the truth. It's not a good thing. This is freedom masquerading. Wait, slavery masquerading as freedom. Though we can't admit it. Also implied, you can't admit it. We don't admit it. If we did admit it, then we'd have all this suffering and anxiety, and we'd really have to rethink what we're all about. And that's what he's trying to get this man, us, whoever, to do. The people.
Well, in doing that, though, that's what I'm wondering. Like, where does that leave us at? And where does action go from there?
Screwed.
Yeah.
Well, that seems to be the conclusion you come to, right? I mean, I'm floundering for a response.
Well,
but
I think you could jump in the scene, right? You could jump in the river, and he doesn't do it, and that's what he's struggling with. And in a way, he's trying to get that back, and he's comfortable in the fact that, fortunately, you can't go back and do it over again. What if you really put your goodwill to the test and said, well, if I could just do all this and, then I could change the world and make it a better place, but I can't, so I guess I won't. And I think that he's trying to charge in this character, possibly in the reader, a sense of urgent obligation whenever the time like that comes again. I think that he would like to rewrite history through everyone that he's being heard by.
Just showing how.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're just showing how proper introspection is really hard, if not, tragic. So he was forced into it with that scene, and he's showing all these other structures in the world that allow us to not properly introspect and realize how fallible and human we all are, right?
Well, and also this ridiculous Jesus standard that he's holding himself to, because again, it means death. Jumping in the Seine means death. So, sure, I'll help. I'll help you across the street. I will get you off of this charge if you're an orphan or a widow. I'll do all these things and I'll feel good about myself. But when it comes right down to it, no, I'm not going to die. And so what is this thing that we have held up in society that we're supposed to try and emulate? We're screwed. There's no way. I'm not dying for it. I'm not jumping in the Seine to save someone who's killing themselves. I'm not doing it.
I think that's much more problematic, though, from the point in history where he's coming from. Because if you're coming right out of a World War II situation where collaborators and your best friends, were making choices about whether the person next to them would live or die, I think that's a very imminent question then. And this is at the heart of his conflict with Sartre, too. It's this conflict between an abstract sense of justice and these complex, concrete situations.
Realities.
We're forced to make those situations.
No, that's true. I hadn't actually considered that, but you're right.
There's a quote from him about Sartre has that. I don't know what book it's in, but he has that example of. It's a famous existentialist example of where, the boy who has to choose between going to war to fight for freedom and staying home to take care of his mother who's sick. And Sartre's point, to the extent that I understand it there, was that, sometimes you have to just simply choose. You don't have a right answer. You don't have guidance. You're going to betray some sort of moral code, whichever choice you make. But Camus, ironically, had a situation where that was actually sort of a concrete choice that he did have to make in his life, because the Algerian independent state that was sort of on the horizon when he was dealing with all of this, he was in support of, from what I understand, but he had said something to the effect in his in or after his Nobel Prize speech, to the extent of, about terrorism when it comes to people bombing in the streets and things like that. If I have to choose between, that sort of violence for the greater good, even if it really is the greater good, and my mother getting hurt in one of those explosions, then I choose my mother. So he had to make that choice between a cause that he believed in and, his own family, and that was a real, choice for him, and he was criticized heavily for saying that, from what I understand.
But he was right. He was right, because that's what most people would do.
Yeah.
I mean, he's talking about the reality. And also I think it comes out here when he is discussing slavery too, that the fact is we can't People are slaves, and they are, and not to go off text majorly or anything, but I saw that film Straight Outta Compton recently, and I remember I was looking at it. Oh yeah, let's apply The Fall by Albert Camus to Straight Outta Compton, and we can actually, but the one thing I just left there shaking my head going, Jesus fuck, nothing's changed since Martin Luther King. Nothing has freaking changed since Rodney King in 1991. Nothing has changed. It's still happening today. And that's because there are still slaves out there. And it just is that. And he's right when he says that. Yeah, I'm going to save my mom. Everybody's going to save their mom before they save humanity. And that's just the way we are. And I think that's part of the big struggle of this book. The reality of the human psyche, the human, experience in and of themselves versus what is all around them, the people jumping in the Seine.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is that that's who we are. It's the reality of who we are.
I think you're absolutely right. But I take Mary's point too, that it still may be an impossible standard if living in a complex, interwoven society where we're heavily populated and we have interest groups and people who are in deadly conflict, it may be, maybe we are screwed. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be cynical, but it may be impossible to hold us to that standard, even if it is the necessary standard.
I don't think the Jesus standard is a necessary standard. I really don't. I don't think that people should expect themselves to be heroic in their everyday existence. I think that you help to your ability and your comfort. I mean, otherwise you're just gonna, you're gonna spend all your time in tears.
I mean, if Jesus is questioning his life choices on the cross, well, what are we going to do?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dad. Now what?
But that was Sartre's problem. He would, that was, can that stop the Nazis? Can without violence for the greater good, can you just do your best and stop the Nazis? That was always his answer. It was no. That's not going to cut it. You have to get your hands dirty.
Yeah, and this is 84. He's talking about the jumper on the scene. From the evening when I was called, for I was really called, I had to answer, or at least seek an answer. It wasn't easy. For some time I floundered. To begin with, that perpetual laugh and the laughers had to teach me to see clearly within me and to discover at last that I was not simple. Don't smile, the truth is not so basic as it seems. What we call basic truths are simply the ones we discover after all the others. However that may be, after prolonged research on myself, I brought out the fundamental duplicity of the human being. And this is why the character takes on his marquee as the Janus, the double face. He realizes that there is a struggle going on, and this is not simple, that there is, at least it's not simple.
Yeah. I like that what he says after that. Then I realized, as a result of delving in my memory, that modesty helped me to shine, humility to conquer, and virtue to oppress. I used to wage war by peaceful means and eventually used to achieve, through disinterested means, everything I desired. So...
Oh, and I love what he says just after this, just as like I've so felt this. I laughed not too loud because I was reading late at night and my roommate was asleep, but he talks about whenever it's his birthday, and I'll wear this. I totally do this. I just let my birthday go completely past, but only so that I can say, whenever everyone's forgotten, I just wanted to be forgotten so that I could complain to myself I was
complain.
And also there's another part that he says, and again, I'll wear this. He talks about all of his friends and having this conflict that they don't care enough or whatever, and he wants to get revenge, and he has a fantasy that he could kill himself and then see everyone else react to it. And then he goes on to think, well, if I did that, I would probably be. First of all, I couldn't. But if he could, he would probably be disappointed with the reactions that he got.
Yeah, because how did he react when when other people died? I love his stuff about the dead. I love his stuff about you love them because you have no obligation to them anymore.
Yeah, that was really
remember them. Yeah.
Yeah. What did he say? It was there's one. It's like I don't know a lot about relationships. This is paraphrasing, but the one thing that I do know to solve my relationship struggle would be if my partner died.
Yeah.
Because then I wouldn't have any obligation. They would be a romantic memory forever, and I could just go on from there. And then, but he goes on to say, like, so, but you can't operate like that. You can't wish the depopulation of the world just to get to a state of life for yourself if you care about humanity or if you love your fellow man at all. And he does claim there a love of humankind. And so at each turn, I feel like anyone who hasn't read this would hear all these things and just think, what a jerk. But but it's kind of precisely the point, because whenever that lingers with you, you're like, oh wait, okay, that's kind of me. I'm guilty of that. And that's the good get of this entire story is this, like, oh, I seduced you into listening to this confession, which is actually a confession of man, and you can relate to it. And it's like this big gotcha. He got me at the end. I was like, oh man, you really lured me in, and now I'm looking at myself
and everyone else and humanity.
Yeah. And again, I think it's important that he says this, isn't the ideal, and I've longed for another alternative. And he says also that whenever he hears the laugh, and this is the laugh that haunted him, that reminded him of the woman jumping off the bridge, that he goes into doubt again, and he has these intervals where he's really doubtful about the positions that he's taken up or the stances that he has. And then he goes back into crushing someone else who's more covered up or more in the mesh, in the everydayness, and gets relief.
Yeah, I agree. There were so many little points in this book that really got to me, just in the exact way that you're saying, because he's so penetrating in his analysis of the ways in which our altruistic motives are really actually selfish. And yeah, I mean, that's really all I can say, but I don't think it reminded me a lot of Notes from the Underground. I mean, possibly because I've reread this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I brought that comparison up the other night. I was telling somebody I had this call coming up, and I loved it, and it was just as intense as Notes from the Underground. Yeah. I'm glad you said so.
Yeah, that was really all I wanted to say. But I'm glad you saw the same.
Well, we're getting to the end of the second hour here, and I wonder if there's lingering things out there that we haven't touched that we want to pull in.
I don't know, Nathan. I was just enjoying that awkward silence.
Don't rush into
glad somebody was.
Pretty much everything that I had highlighted or written down, people have, either I've talked about or someone else talked about. So, I liked what I liked a lot what he had to say about truth and lying. I really loved reading this. Really enjoyed it.
Me too.
I highlighted a bunch of passages and just, made a little note, beautiful, like just about the writing.
Yeah.
When he's on the Zuider Zee with the guy, and they're in the boat, and it's so foggy that they can't tell that they're, it's so foggy that the guy couldn't tell that they were going actually quite fast. And I thought that was a beautiful analogy about life. It goes by in a minute. But things appear calm because of the fog.
Yay for fog.
Yay for fog.
it's really full of ideas, and I mean, I think it's part of the style is just a guy, talking to you for 150 pages. So there's no, 2 pages on what the scenery looks like. It's him just throwing everything out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like the occasional little. He would respond to someone talking, but the other voice isn't in there. And so in the first section, at least, I think this was more prominent. In the last, he talks a little bit more like this. In the last, he's like, "Actually, would you help me up? I want to show you something. Thank you." And but in the beginning, there's one. Oh, that was cool. I instinctively turned to just the right page. He's talking on, this is 36. He says, "You see, not even the snow that was falling that day made me withdraw." What? Oh, I'm getting to it. Never fear. Besides, I never left it. He's like, you think that I'm wandering here, but I'm actually, this is all the point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the
We didn't talk about the doves. And I think that was a big, was a big part of it, but.
Yeah, and another thing is, takes place in Amsterdam, if we're not, not to ruin Cesari's point, which was well taken about the scenery and where they are, but isn't that an issue wasn't that brought up about Dante, right?
Mm.
And
absolutely.
the canals in Amsterdam?
Yeah, we're like the rings of hell.
Right. I'm not sure, I mean, I guess that was a specific reason why he placed this in Amsterdam. Unless that's where he was when he wrote this, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that he talked about Amsterdam in this way of being, so why is it like hell? He talked about a collection of people coming there from all walks of life, and this was somehow a nexus, and he found himself wandering the streets and, the circles and the canals and feeling like a lost soul. And, coming to Mexico City, this place of, this bar, called Mexico City, in this place of torment where people were, drowning their sorrows. And
yeah, they're all exiles. He's exiled himself in there, and he's there with the exiles.
Mm. Yeah, and you almost see like this figure in limbo shouting out to everyone.
It's interesting the way that, Dante's been used as a framework for so many novels, but religion in general, I think it's part of the theme of the novel that it provides that framework for not just literature, but seeing the world, and sets things up in an interpretable way. And that's probably one of the chief functions of it actually existing that isn't always recognized, I think. And to abandon religion, we think or at least maybe sometimes I think of it as, you're just abandoning these outdated forms of morality, but really there's so much more to it. There's so much the Christian narrative and framework. There's so much to our Laura posted the thing that talked about the metaphysics in our language and our ways of seeing the world and just interpreting everyday experience. I think that it's really complicated, the ways in which all that is just so inextricable from our experience, and to move beyond it would be much more complicated, I think, than we often recognize.
And the Jesus in practice was a man that he highly sympathized with, not the Christian ideal, but the Jesus man, struggling with the guilt that he had of being, the one, and feeling that he was, man incarnate, and dealing with the same things that our narrator Jean felt, that he was also this man going through life, and he had an incredible sympathy for that feeling, and it was so important that he shouted out, that's what breaks through that kind of glossy version of it, that this guy, I think Cesare said that, he just went up on the cross and, died and was happy for it. It's more complicated than that. And that complexity is what he feels he's continuing as a human being, as a man in the world, still.
Yeah. Mm. You can't just put it down to following some laws. You have to live your life.
Good luck with that.
Still alive. I've had some luck.
It doesn't seem like it gets easier for him once he makes this big, introspective discovery, though. There's no sort of light at the end of the tunnel, it doesn't seem to me.
No, he just does the same thing over and over. He keeps going back to Mexico City. He's
it's just
running
he just wears
his experiment.
Yeah, he's just open with what his intentions are now. But
yeah, that's what limbo was, right? I mean, it's just eternal. You virtuous pagans, you're good guys, but you just came too soon. So too bad. You're gonna stay here forever.
That's right.
I thought I really enjoyed this a lot more than The Stranger, I have to say. Or other writings I've read of his. The Stranger is the only other work of fiction, and then I've read The Myth of Sisyphus, but
right.
I just thought this was a lot more elegant as a work of literature.
I hear it's one of his least understood, pieces.
Yeah.
Not that any of it's understood, but I'm just saying. I've heard it's of everything he's written, it's his least understood.
Interesting.
And it's his last. I mean, did he die not long after this was published?
4 years later.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, I could see that because it's extremely complicated.
Yeah, very.
Makes for a good conversation.
Yeah, I love this book. I've never read anything else by Camus. I've got on maybe a dozen notepads The Myth of Sisyphus written down. I've heard it time and time again, and the idea of the story itself is interesting to me, or the idea of Sisyphus. But this is the only one I've read. I've not read The Stranger, even though I know it's high school 101 stuff.
Yeah.
Oops. Sorry.
Okay.
yeah, I like this as well. I've read The Stranger and The Plague, which I also liked. But it's good. I haven't read Camus in a while. Myth of Sisyphus was hard to get through, though, for me.
Yeah. But it seemed like he maybe reformed a little bit of that philosophy in this book when he was talking about suicide in a much more digestible way. I don't know. Totally agree with you. He seemed like I've always heard that he's a much better literary writer than a philosophical writer, and I definitely would agree with that sentiment. I found The Myth of Sisyphus hard to get through as well, and he's just so much more eloquent when he's writing fiction.
Yeah, and there's one line. It's funny, I got this book secondhand. I thought I was getting it like new, but there's highlights from it, and I'm sure you all understand the relationship with highlights. It's this weird look into someone else's, and whenever you see what they highlight, and then there's times whenever it really marks out your own thinking. And anyhow, and it just happens that this is interested in me, and then the mysterious reader who had the book before me, but he's talking about people and his practice of being the judge penitent. This is on 140. It's nearly the end. He says, "I am like them, to be sure. We are in the soup together. However, I have a superiority in that I know it, and this gives me the right to speak. You see the advantage, I am sure. The more I accuse myself, the more I have a right to judge you. Even better, I provoke you into judging yourself, and this relieves me of that much of the burden. Ah, my friend, we are odd, wretched creatures, and if we merely look back over our lives, there's no lack of occasions to amaze and horrify ourselves. Just try. I shall listen, you may be sure, to your own confession with a great feeling of fraternity." And that great feeling of fraternity is, I think, what he's connecting back to Jesus and to the every man that he speaks to at Mexico City.
Really pretty writing.
Yes.
One more, just a couple of lines after, he's talking about this trick and how it works with people, but with the intelligent ones, it takes time.
It takes time.
Yeah. Huh.
But they'll get there.
Yeah.
You gotta woo them.
Or jump in the Seine.
Oh.
There's an option.
Yeah.
I was imagining when he was talking about, he's like a pro bono lawyer who takes on, clients for free and works for the poor, and then he let this person die in the river. I just imagine like a Fox News, like, socialist lawyer lets child die.
And Donald Trump would be there. Donald Trump would be right on this end.
Yeah.
Oh God.
And they want to mark out all this hypocrisy, right? But that's the core of the book.
Yeah.
This idea of hypocrisy.
Yeah, it is kind of the core, and it's the core of Christianity as well.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking that how Seth has his little no Nazi talk rule. I think that we should institute a no Trump rule. Sorry, it's going to be a long election, and I can't take it.
Oh man, yeah.
All right, no Nazi rule, no Trump rule. Okay.